Welcome, everybody, to the Parapsychology Foundation Lyceum Presents Parapsychology Foundation Lyceum Forum Physical Mediumship. Today is October 15, 2016. So today's speaker is Dr. Carlos S. Alvarado, who you will see on the camera very soon.
And first, Carlos's biography. So Dr. Carlos Alvarado has a PhD in psychology from the University of Edinburgh. He is an associate editor of the Journal of Scientific Exploration, a member of the editorial board of the Journal for the Society for Psychical Research, and the past president of the Parapsychological Association, actually a two-time past president. Alvarado's work has centered on survey research on out-of-body experiences and other psychic experiences, and studies about the history of psychical research. He is the recipient of the 2010 Parapsychological Association's Outstanding Contribution Award. Alvarado is one of the editors of Research in Parapsychology 1993 and the compiler of the short bibliography Getting Started in Parapsychology. He has authored over 290 papers in history, psychology, psychiatry, and parapsychology journals. And now, here's Carlos.
Hello. Can you hear me? Hello.
Okay.
Can you hear me?
Okay, take it away.
All right. Well, it's a pleasure to be here. I'm really glad to see topics such as physical mediumship being discussed in one of the forums of the Parapsychology Foundation. Physical mediumship was a very important phenomenon at the beginning of spiritualism and psychical research. Not so much now. The topic has been mostly abandoned. But I will not be talking more about the present. I'm going to be talking about the historical development of physical mediumship. And what you will hear are just some very brief comments about a variety of things. You can see here in this slide, I would like to start basically saying, what is physical mediumship, the variety of phenomena. Then say something about the place of physical mediumship within spiritualism and mediumship in general. Then move on into some specific studies that have been done of telekinesis and materialization phenomena. Say something about concepts and theories that have been developed over time. And that's important because a lot of the current discussions of physical mediumship, even when they get into the past, they do not focus on the very rich history of ideas of psychic forces and the like that were developed to explain all of these phenomena. Then say something about the problem of fraud, present some specific examples. And just finish with a few general comments about the impact of mediumship, particularly physical mediumship, on psychical research. Let's start with some very general things about what mediumship is. As you know, the medium is a person that is believed to have the abilities to contact or to channel spirits of dead persons. Generally, we divide mediumship into mental and physical mediumship. The mental medium is the one that receives communication from supposed spirits in many ways, such as having visions, verbal statements, like things have come to mind to the medium and the medium will verbalize it, automatic writing, like what you see here in the illustration in the top right, impressions, and many other subjective experiences. The whole idea is to deliver communications via the workings of the mind of the medium. The same can be said about physical mediumship, in that these communications, again, believed by spiritualists and many others to come from spirits of the dead. If that's the case or not, that's a different issue. But in this case, where the medium presents physical phenomena around him or her. And that's what we refer to as physical mediumship. Physical phenomena of different source, and we will get to the phenomena that happen around a particular individual. This individual may be in or out of trance. Trance is a very ill-defined concept even to this day. I will argue that there has never been any proper studies of trance. There are many observations, many of them quite good, but that's one of the topics that we need to get back into. What is a trance? What type of altered state of consciousness are we talking about? And even the relationship between trance and physical phenomena is something that has been speculated for many years. It's still something that is quite unclear. We have many mediums and neither trance produces phenomena, while there are others that the phenomena will happen in different states of consciousness, not only while they were supposed to be in a very deep trance. Sometimes the trance, if present, was kind of very light. But again, let's get to the phenomena. As you can see here in the illustrations, they are quite fascinating. We have things such as table tilting, and I will say more about that later. That's not particularly an example of mediumship because you don't need necessarily a medium in a group that sits around a table, and the table will tilt, will move around. Sometimes the table will levitate, that means it will float in the air. There are examples of spirit photography, like the one illustrated here on the far right. Basically, someone comes to a seance environment or comes to the presence of a spirit photographer. They take a photo of the person, and later on, they get a photograph like the one that you see here. This is a very famous case in which the spirit of the American President Abraham Lincoln was said to appear, and the lady here is his wife. Because of that, it achieved a lot of prominence. It was a photograph obtained with the American medium William Mumler. The center one represents the phenomenon of materializations or things that appear, usually figures of human beings, in the presence of these mediums. And I will discuss later some of these mediums, and you will see a lot of photographs of these materializations. It's probably the most controversial of the physical phenomena. But there were many other phenomena, even to this day. Direct writing, which was basically the appearance of writing on paper, or in the old days on slates. What you see here, the photograph that you see here on the right, it's a case of slate writing with the English medium William Eglinton. Sometimes the slates were kind of sealed or just left in the open, and writing just as this will appear. This is a quite complex case with a lot of writing, but there are other cases that you only get a short name or something, just one or a few words. Direct voice, where voices are heard in the seances. Sometimes music was heard and there was no apparent normal source. That was also a very impressive phenomena. Apports, or the appearance of objects. You are in a seance setting, and sometimes you hear something falls on the table, and there is a jewel or a fruit or flowers just lying on the table. The photograph on the left is the case of the medium Elizabeth Desperance, and you see a plant by her. That plant supposedly appeared in one of her seances and remained after the seance, and they were able to take a photograph. In many cases, this source, and many luminous effects, lights that appear around the medium or floating all around the seance room. And there are also cases of perfumes, all kinds of things that people smell, usually pleasant, sometimes are not so pleasant, but most of them are. And then raps, which was a very important phenomenon, because raps allow people to ask questions and to the supposed spirits and the raps, which are blows that you will hear on a table or on a wall or just out of the air. The raps will answer questions and information could be obtained. This is, in a general way, some of the main phenomena of physical mediumship. I'm going to be focusing later on mainly on movement of objects, called in the old days telekinesis, and materializations or appearances of body parts like hands or whole figures, whole people, you will see their whole bodies walking within the seance room, appearing and disappearing. Those of you that are not familiar with mediumship should be aware that in the 19th century, especially in the middle of the century, the movement of spiritualism develops. It is basically a resurgence of ancient beliefs that have been with us from antiquity, with the idea that, of course, there is survival after death, that there are people that communicate with the dead and produce all these phenomena. But for our purposes, it's important to see that in the United States, this new movement of so-called modern spiritualism appears, and this provides the context for the appearance of, at first, just a few mediums, and in a very short period of time, so we're talking about hundreds, and later, in a question of months, thousands of mediums that appear all through the United States. And of course, that happens also in other countries, such as England, France, and many other places. The movement basically used the figure of the medium to support its main tenets, which were survival of bodily death and a few other issues. But the claim was that this was an empirical approach to spiritual problems. You did not have to rely on, have much confidence on faithful arguments of faith. Instead, you could go and ask the medium questions and see if you could communicate with people you have lost, so you could see or at least hear about the spiritual issues, as opposed to just having faith, as in for example, in the different Christian religions. A very important early case are the Fox sisters that you see here on the left, that started producing the phenomenon of raps. Raps were heard around them in their house, and soon communication was established. You can ask the so-called spirit to rap 1 for yes or 2 for no, or some other codes, and you can ask questions, and you can also go through the alphabet and see when there is a rap, you stop in a particular letter. In that way, you will get information about the name of the spirits and what they were doing. And of course, everyone or almost everyone that was present immediately accepted that they were spirits, because it was something unexplained, and they could not see anyone doing these things by normal means. I will not say much more about them. Like many of the early mediums, they were extremely controversial, all kinds of accusations of fraud. Very early on, they were claiming that the raps were produced by the bones in the toes and the knees of the mediums. Some people will talk about toe cracking mediums and things of that sort. And that was accepted by the skeptics, but the believers were quick to point that there were many phenomena that were very difficult to explain by the dislocation of bones that would make sounds. First of all, those sounds will be localized. They will not be heard in different places. Sometimes they were felt on tables or on places distant from the medium, and they will convey information that only one person knew in the seance room. So it was clearly a much more complicated phenomena than that. Many physical mediums follow the Fox sisters. Here in this slide are just a few of the most famous ones. Like in the center, there is the famous Didi Hume. I will talk more about him later. But they all produce materializations, movement of objects. Most of them fell in trance. And there are amazing reports about the phenomena that they produce. But again, I just wanted you to see the faces of some of these people. I will discuss a few of their phenomena later on. There are many other mediums that today are not so much remembered. But you see in these slides are very early American physical mediums. The Davenport brothers on the left basically made mediumship a public spectacle. They will go around giving shows. It was like a theatrical performance. They were inside a cabinet like the one you see there, and it was all in darkness, and they were tied up inside this big cabinet, and musical instruments that were placed inside supposedly will start playing. Sometimes they will claim that they will go out of the cabinet, and later on the mediums were found tied again and supposedly had not moved from their place. They were making a lot of money with these performances. It's very difficult to know what's happening because of the sensational aspects involved, and also this was a period that there were not clear control investigations, and the whole purpose of this was not investigations. It was just to present a big show that will entertain people, will make them some money, and if it was real or not is a different question. But they traveled all around Europe. They were in France, in many other places, and spread the whole idea of physical mediumship. The other ones are also early mediums, like the Eddy brothers, that were big in materialization phenomena, some of them quite outstanding. One of the early physical phenomena that was very important for the later development of mediumship and acceptance of physical manifestations was the phenomenon of table turning. Here you have the book of Gasparin, that was a student of politics and many other issues, but he was one of the first, if not the first, conducted systematic observations of seances in which tables and people around were trying to produce physical phenomena, and he documented a lot of fascinating phenomena. He was not a believer in the spirit idea. He thought that it was basically the psychic fluid or forces of the individuals that form a chain around the table, and when it went out, tables will move and do all kinds of things. Many others started being interested as well. In Switzerland, Marc Thury published in 1855 a book in French in which he confirmed a lot of the phenomena other people were reporting, but he also did a lot of measurements on the table. Like, one of the things he was interested was to see if he could determine how much force was needed in terms of grams of pressure to move the table. And as you see here in this slide, I will not go in great detail, he mentions several specific grams that he found to be insufficient when that pressure was applied to the table. So he was trying very slowly to find out how much force was really needed for these things to happen. So again, it's a very early attempt to use measurement to study physical phenomena, something that continued later. The medium that I mentioned before was very important in the instrumental study of physical phenomena, was Daniel Douglas Hume. And as you can see here in this book, Experiences in Spiritualism, with Mr. D.D. Hume, published in 1869, it's basically almost like a diary of fascinating experiences in seances. Adair, the author of this report, later was called Don Raven, and at this point he is living with this medium. They were together, they shared a room, and Adele was able to observe a lot of phenomena very clearly in front of him. Not only movement of objects, but things like fire immunity. That's another physical phenomena that Hume showed, which was, he will get a coal, burning coal, hold it in his hand, put it in his face, put it in his hair, put his hand on flames, and he will not be burned. In this book, there are also some instances in which that so-called immunity to fire was transferred to other individuals that were in the seance. Remember, the seance context was a room, there was a big table, the medium was seated, usually a round table, the medium was sitting on one side, and around the table there were many other individuals that were the seers. And they would see things, they would hear things, in darkness or sometimes semi-darkness. Hume performed at different levels of light, and sometimes the room was light enough, illuminated enough, that it was possible for people to be sure that things were happening in one place and that the medium was not producing them, because they could see the medium, they could see something moving, they could see materializations of hands, for example. That was a very specific phenomenon that Hume produced, very beautiful, delicate hands that will appear, will touch people, and then will vanish. Some people, there are descriptions of people holding the hands and feeling that they were physical, but then some seconds later they will vanish in the hand of the person. So this is a sort of document that was trying to, not a scientific study, but a very good description of what was happening in the seances with this medium. This medium later is studied by William Crookes, that was an English chemist and physicist, and a very important figure in the early development of psychical research. Remember, we're talking about the early 1870s. This is before the Society for Psychical Research was founded in England in 1882. After the founding of that society, the field started to become more systematic through the work of different committees and different individuals that were trying to develop not only good observations, but a good methodology and about mediumship and about many other phenomena, such as ESP experiences and so forth. And in this case, we have here Crookes has contact with Hume, and he conducts studies of the influence that Hume could produce on various instruments that he used. He published that in 2 articles in the Quarterly Journal of Science that appeared in 1871. He was the editor of that journal, so he was able to insert these things freely. It was not that easy in many of the other science journals of the times because of the skepticism. And he later collected these and other studies that he did with other mediums like Florence Cook in this book. And you see here on the right hand side, this yellow book, Researches in the Phenomena of Spiritualism. Many of the tests were positive. One of them was what you see here. Hume was seated like this. You see this round basket in which he's holding very lightly an accordion. In his seances, if there was an accordion on the table, people will hear sounds coming out of the accordion without anyone touching. And here he had Hume sitting like you see here, holding the accordion as pictured on the right hand diagram, and the keys of the instrument were on the opposite side from where Hume was holding the instrument. Under these conditions, the sounds were produced. One of the things that Crookes was trying to do was, using his training as a physicist, he was trying to find out if the physical variables affected the production of this phenomena. And one of the things he did was that this basket, he was able to run an electrical current around the basket. And he was arguing, well, if this is some type of new force, and he used that term a lot, a new force. Later he started using a psychic force. Maybe electricity will block this force. Maybe it will not happen. Let's see what happens. And the phenomena continue to happen, to take place. So this is a very early example of the interaction, and I tend to study systematically the interaction between physical variables and a physical phenomenon. But he did more. He used this type of instrument. He had a board on the left hand. There was him putting very lightly his fingers, and on the right hand side, suspended kind of in the air, there was the other part of the board that was hanging from a measuring balance. If there was pressure put on the right hand side, it will be measured by the balance, by the measuring instrument, and he will be able to see not only that there was movement, but measure how much in terms of force. He could quantify the phenomenon. These are other instruments that he used. This receptacle to the left that you can see was placed in connection also with the balance shown on the right. Here he filled this with water, this receptacle. And was another physical study in which Hume's hands were on top of the receptacle, and the idea was, see if you can make the other side of the board go down while your hands are on top of this receptacle full of water. What he was thinking was, well, if the force is flowing downwards, it has to go through the water. Will that affect the phenomenon? And he found that the phenomenon still happened. The board will move downwards. Again, another attempt to quantify and to relate movement of objects to physical variables. Here you see he created a graphic display of the way that these movements will take place, and they were not constant movements. They were basically variables. So the thing will move kind of up and down or very slightly. It seemed to work in different fluctuations. Something that he was not able to determine the exact nature of the force, but he believed that it was a vital force coming from Hume's body. I will get more into that later. Another example of a very influential medium is the Italian Eusapia Palladino, which was very active from the late 19th century to parts of the 20th century. She died in 1918, but her heyday was basically between the 1890s and about 1910 or so. She was very controversial because she was found to commit fraud. As you can see in the picture here, she was being held around a table by people on both her right and her left, and she was very good in liberating one of the hands from control. And once she had one hand liberated, as you can see in the diagram here, she could touch people, she could move the table, she could do all kinds of things, particularly in cases where the room was really dark and people could not see. That was not the case in all the seances. There were times where phenomena clearly occur that could not really be explained by such a simple trick, especially phenomena occurring to the other side of the table or in other parts of the room. So a lot of people believe that she had a real phenomena in spite of these incidents of fraud. This is probably the first scientific investigation that happened at Milan in Italy in 1892. Here we see a table levitation with her. And the importance of this is that this is the first time that many different scientists came to observe her. There were people from Aksakov, was a Russian diplomat. He seems to have been the organizer. Schiaparelli was an astronomer from Italy. So Broferio was also from Italy. And Macora was another physicist from Italy. Carl Duprel was from Germany, a philosopher, and so forth. this report, they not only brought a lot of scientists together, but they also brought their own instruments and were trying to weight the medium, and they found that she was able to alter her weight without any apparent sudden movement. They will sit here on a balance and make the measurements. And there were many other phenomena, some of them in light, others in darkness, and many of these people became convinced early on, and this launched the career of this medium forward. After this, she started being investigated by a lot of individuals, such as the ones that you see here in this slide. Palladino convinced a lot of scientists and psychical researchers, like Oliver Lodge, physicist from England, Filippo Bottazzi, a physiologist from Italy, Marie and Pierre Curie, which did not conduct long studies of her, but had some seances with her in the early 1900s, and were sure that something was going on. Astronomer Camille Flammarion, physiologist Charles Richet, and Cesare Lombroso here on the far left, which was a very important figure in the early study of Palladino. They all were convinced these phenomena were real. And in some ways this was kind of unprecedented, because previous mediums, they convinced a lot of people, but never so many scientists, many of which had seances in conditions that they felt they could see physical phenomena, such as movements of the table and of objects, and they were completely unexplained. Here are some photos of some of the phenomena. The Camille Flammarion that I mentioned before in 1897 in France, he had seances with the medium, and here you see the table levitating. It's unfortunate that in almost all the photos you never see the table clearly floating. There is always someone's skirt or pant or leg or something covering some of the legs, so you actually don't see completely what's going on. But that's the importance of seeing these things together with the testimony that was collected at the seance. Photos by themselves can never be used as very convincing proof of anything happening. The value of the photo is when you put it together with the testimony and the description of the conditions during which the phenomena were happening. And then you may have good evidence if both of them present something that is quite unexplained. This is an example with the mentioned Lombroso, which was a very famous criminologist and psychiatrist in Italy. And he has this example. He says, when the lights had been turned on and we were all ready to go, that was at the end of the seance, a great wardrobe that stood in the alcove room about 6.5 feet away from us was seen advancing slowly towards us. It seemed like a huge pachyderm that was proceeding in leisurely fashion to attack us and looked as if pushed forward by someone. This is just one example out of many that Lombroso observed, and that many other people also observed. Again, Lombroso was a very well-known all around the world scientist, and he was controversial because he has a lot of ideas about criminals, about prostitutes, about women that today we think are nonsense. But at the time, even if controversial, he was highly influential, and his name and prestige did much to push the mediumship of Palladino. As time went on, and this is 1908, when they published studies and observations that were conducted in France by the General Psychological Institute between 1905 and 1908. And here are fascinating studies, many of them instrumental studies, in which they are trying to measure, say, the levitation. What you see here in black, the black square, those are tracings, and there are 4 of them. Each of them measures their electrical impulses that come from the legs of a table. And every time one of those legs is raised, a circuit is closed, and it produces a current that creates a tracing. The idea being that if half of the table, if two legs are in the air, it will register that two legs were in the air. If there were four of the legs floating, it will register the four at the same time, or one or the other. It was a very ingenious way of showing that the table was moving, but again, it depends on the conditions of control. Because if you get your hand and you raise the table normally, you will get the same tracings. So this really doesn't tell you much about if the levitation or the movement of the table was paranormal or not. Still, what you do is you combine the use of instrumentation with good observation and control, and then you make your case, which is what they were trying to do in this report, which is unique, I would say, in the psychic literature, because they not only had instrumental recordings, they did physiological, psychological studies of the medium. They had some physical measurements of ionization around the body of the medium. When the phenomena were happening, they didn't find changes in ionization in this case. But it was a model that I think still can be used today to study physical mediums. As time goes on, many other people come in to do studies. And remember, these are just a few examples I'm showing you. There are literally hundreds of other examples, many of them not well known, many of them unpublished. In this case, this is in Ireland, mechanical engineer William Crawford conducts research. Here you see his three main books with the medium Kathleen Gallagher. This medium sat with members of her family, and on many occasions the only researcher was Crawford, and then there was the medium and some members of her family, and he found that there were many fascinating things, the most common being table levitations. And being a mechanical engineer, he basically was trying to discover the mechanics of this phenomenon. Again, like Crookes did earlier, he was applying his training in engineering and science in general to see if he could find out how these things work, what was happening there. One of the things that he came with was he put the medium in a chair and put her on a balance, like a weighting instrument, as you see here on the left. And he was getting all these levitations that he was convinced were real. And he found that there were different ways in which the levitations were happening. These diagrams that show the tables floating, and you see that there is a line going into the chair. When in some cases the medium sitting on a balance seemed to absorb the weight of the table, or at least part of it. And he surmised that if this is what is happening, there has to be a connection between the medium and the table, and it will be in the form of a lever or a cantilever that does the job but also absorbs the weight and passes it to the medium. But sometimes the table was up there and he did not find the change in weight in the medium. So he thought, in the diagram here in the center, that what he called a psychic structure was raising the table had a point of touching the floor and then connected it to the table. So the weight will go down, but it was not transferred to the medium. And this was a fascinating, very creative series of studies, because it took many seances to determine this. And was affected a lot of people in Germany. Schreck-Notzing and many others were reading these investigations, and the whole idea of forces coming out from the medium received a lot of support from this research. There were many other things that he did, but there is no time to really get into them. Another example is the Polish philosopher and psychologist Julian Ochorowicz and the medium Stanislawa Tomczyk. This is my favorite photograph of Tomczyk. I just love that hat. She looks really innocent, really nice. And basically, she was a medium. She will say that spirits were affecting her, and she will do physical phenomena. Mainly, she will move her hands about objects, and the spirits will say, "Yeah, we're going to levitate those objects." And there are several photographs of these levitating objects. Horowitz took many conditions uh, to try to prevent fraud. This is just one of the famous photographs. We see the investigator to the right and the medium to the left. She was sometimes in a trance, sometimes not so much. And here she seems to be levitating some scissors, as you can see there with her hands. But she levitated many other things, all of them small objects. Here you see some other examples. There were little plastic balls and many other things. Between 1910 and 1912. And one of the things that he did was that he felt that the medium, and at some point he saw coming from her hands what he believed was a thread that people later have described as an ectoplasmic thread. And that little very thin thread, sometimes it was seen as a dark thread, was the one that was moving the objects, was doing other things. He basically asked her to put the threads on fire to see if they were consumed, and they did not disappear. He found out that I lost my slides here. He found out that she was not a, okay, they're back. That the threads could move through liquid, and you will see the liquid moving, and she was able to carry some of the liquid particles from one plate to another. And I have my slides going crazy here. I don't know why. And then he did a lot of different tests that convinced him that there was a force coming out from her hands. And she also claimed that there were spirit hands that she could materialize. And he took a lot of photos in which the spirit hand that he could not see, but the medium will approach the plates, and things like what you see here on the right hand side will appear. Again, there is a lot that I cannot say, but he was a good pioneer for what we call today process research. He was trying to find out the mechanism of these physical phenomena with these mediums. Let me say something about materializations, and remember, I have to be jumping really fast in order to give you a general idea of this literature, or not much detail. In the United States, a famous book published in 1875 by Henry Olcott was People from the Other World. And here you see all kinds of materializations, many of which were asked to step on a weighing machine, and they were able to measure the weight of these things. The conditions here were not as good, I would say, like what you saw with Palladino or Tom Schick, or even with David Hume, but they were very influential, especially in spiritualism, to promote the idea that these things will happen. They happened with the Eddy brothers, which were very controversial, partly because they were the type of humans of mediums that really big claims were made, but there were not a lot of careful investigations, and sometimes the descriptions of the controls were not very clear. But it's the type of thing that was prevalent in the early days in the States and in other places regarding full body materializations. We will come back again to the observations of William Crookes, who also studied materializations. And here we see the famous medium Florence Cook, a British medium, that in her presence, the figure of Katie King that you see here in the center used to appear. And what Crookes was trying to show was first, is this a real phenomena? And then is this form of Katie independent from the medium? He conducted many seances, and before he did this medium had been performing in the London area for a long time, and there were many people that were convinced and had seen the same manifestations. These are photos taken with the person with the beard on the left is Crookes. This is a younger Crookes. And the right-hand figure is this materialized form of Katie, the famous Katie King, which was supposed to appear all around. She was supposedly appear in the United States and was a celebrity from the spirit world. Crookes had a lot of problems in determining if there was different. He reports that at the end of many of his seances, he was able to determine that there were separate figures, and this is an artistic conception of the moment when that happens, which the medium had collapsed in the floor, and he was able to go and touch her and see that it was the medium, and it was in darkness, so he had to lift the lantern, and he saw Katie, the materialized form, just standing on the medium on the floor, and repeatedly he moved the lantern to make sure that there were two different entities, a spirit materialization and a medium on the floor. And eventually he became convinced, yeah, this is real, and they are different. And that was a very important thing, because at the time in the 1870s, and even a little before, an idea was going around that a lot of these materializations, full body forms, were real, but they were not a separate production from the medium. They were what they call was a transfiguration. That means that the medium herself, her fetus become changed, and then she would walk out of the cabinet or would walk around coming out from wherever she was, and she will appear as a spirit. So in a way, it was not a real materialization, it was not a separate entity, but it was not fraud. It was the medium, partly her face, partly materialized or changed to look like a different entity. And that's why people put a lot of emphasis in those days on seeing both the medium and the spirit materialized. It was not that easy. There are many records, especially in the spiritualist literature, where people say they were able to see medium and form at the same time. But also many of those records don't have a lot of details, and the evidence is not as good as these descriptions that Crookes presented. In later years, we hear a lot of talk about ectoplasm, and which is a substance that appears and sometimes forms into limbs or stays in an amorphous, sometimes quite ugly and disgusting substance. And here are a few examples. Again, there are some examples from the 19th century, and even you could argue that even before, there are some descriptions of these things like clouds and other things of this sort. But this was a medium, Eva C, which started under the name of Marthe Béraud, and she produced this substance, as you can see on her dress, all this white stuff appeared. Like some of the previous researchers, he was not happy with documenting the phenomena by themselves. He wanted to show, or to explore how they were happening. And the thing is, most of his research, with the exception of his initial paper, was published in French, and it's not really well known even today. It appeared mainly between 1910 and 1912. And one of the things that he did was that he felt that the medium, and at some point he saw coming from her hands what he believed was a thread that people later have described as an ectoplasmic thread, and that little very thin thread, sometimes it was seen as a dark thread, was the one that was moving the objects, was doing other things. He basically asked her to put the threads on fire to see if they were consumed, and they did not disappear. He found out that I lost my slides here. He found out that she was not a, okay, they're back. That the threads could move through liquid, and you will see the liquid moving, and she was able to carry some of the liquid particles from one plate to another. And I have my slides going crazy here, I don't know why. And anyhow, he did a lot of different tests that convinced him that there was a force coming out from her hands. And she also claimed that there were spirit hands that she could materialize. And he took a lot of photos in which the spirit hand that he could not see, but the medium will approach the plates, and things like what you see here on the right hand side will appear. Again, there is a lot that I cannot say, but he was a good pioneer for what we call today process research. He was trying to find out the mechanism on these physical phenomena with these mediums. Let me say something about materializations, and remember, I have to be jumping really fast in order to give you a general idea of this literature, or not much detail. In the United States, a famous book published in 1875 by Henry Olcott was People from the Other World. And here you see all kinds of materializations, many of which were asked to step on a weighing machine, and they were able to measure the weight of these things. The conditions here were not as good, I would say, like what you saw with Palladino or Tom Schick or even with Didi Hume, but they were very influential, especially in spiritualism, to promote the idea that these things will happen. They happened with the Eddy brothers, which were very controversial, partly because they were the type of humans of mediums that really big claims were made, but there were not a lot of careful investigations, and sometimes the descriptions of the controls were not very clear. But it's the type of thing that was prevalent in the early days in the States and in other places regarding full body materializations. We will come back again to the observations of William Crookes, who also studied materializations. And here we see the famous medium Florence Cook, a British medium, that in her presence, the figure of Katie King, that you see here in the center, used to appear. And what Crookes was trying to show was first, is this a real phenomena? And then is this form of Katie independent from the medium? He conducted many seances, and before he did this medium had been performing in the London area for a long time, and there were many people that were convinced and had seen the same manifestations. These are photos taken with the person with the beard on the left is Crookes. This is a younger Crookes, and the right hand figure is this materialized form of Katie, the famous Katie King, which was supposed to appear all around. She was supposedly appear in the United States and was a celebrity from the spirit world. Crookes had a lot of problems in determining if there was different. He reports that at the end of many of his seances, he was able to determine that there were separate figures, and this is an artistic conception of the moment when that happens, which the medium had collapsed in the floor, and he was able to go and touch her and see that it was the medium, and it was in darkness, so he had to lift the lantern, and he saw Katie, the materialized form, just standing on the medium on the floor, and repeatedly he moved the lantern to make sure that there were two different entities, a spirit materialization and a medium on the floor. And eventually he became convinced, this is real, and they are different. And that was a very important thing, because at the time, in the 1870s, and even a little before, an idea was going around that a lot of these materializations, full body forms, were real, but they were not a separate production from the medium. They were what they call was a transfiguration. That means that the medium herself, her features become changed, and then she would walk out of the cabinet or would walk around coming out from wherever she was, and she will appear as a spirit. So in a way, it was not a real materialization, it was not a separate entity, but it was not fraud. It was the medium, partly her face, partly materialized or changed to look like a different entity. And that's why people put a lot of emphasis in those days on seeing both the medium and the spirit materialized. It was not that easy. There are many records, especially in the spiritualist literature, where people say they were able to see medium and form at the same time. But also many of those records don't have a lot of details, and the evidence is not as good as these descriptions that Crookes presented. In later years, we hear a lot of talk about ectoplasm, and which is a substance that appears and sometimes forms into limbs or stays in an amorphous, sometimes quite ugly and disgusting substance. And here are a few examples. Again, there are some examples from the 19th century, and even you could argue that even before, there are some descriptions of these things like clouds and other things of this sort. But this was a medium, Eva C, which started under the name of Marthe Béraud, and she produced this substance, as you can see on her dress, all this white stuff appearing. Or on the left, you see all this amorphous form that is kind of crawling like a long tentacle. She was a very important medium to popularize the existence that materializations could appear like these amorphous substances. This is another example of something that appears like a textile product or something with a face in the center, and the face looks like it could be paper or something. And of course, there is a lot of controversy with these examples. Linda Gazzera from Italy, we know less about her. She was studied by Enrico Imoda, a physician from Italy, and also by Charles Richet. And you can see here some of the forms that appear. Here we don't have that much information like we have with Eva. Eva, we had a lot of fascinating descriptions, not only the phenomena, but also of control. And in some of the cases, it's hard to see how these things could have been done in a fraudulent way. But again, the appearance of this substance, and here you see it with Kathleen Gallagher, is so ridiculous and weird that itself engenders a lot of skepticism. And that continues to this day. A lot of people in parapsychology and in other areas, even a lot of spiritualists, don't completely accept or partially accept some of these phenomena. We are going to hear about this particular one, the mediums that Hamilton studied, so I will not say anything about it. I just want to show you some of the ways ectoplasm has been is shown to appear. Again, in a lot of these previous studies, a real attempt has been made to be systematic, to show that these things are real and are not trickery. Hamilton, I think, present amazing photographs, and when you read the reports, even if it looks so weird and strange, it is very hard to to postulate, a normal way in which these things will have been formed. But anyhow, let me change now to the whole idea of theory, which is basically a whole different group of what we can call concepts of force, vital, psychic, nervous forces. You see here several books that come from the 1850s to the 1880s, in which these ideas are discussed. The whole concept of a psychic force was extremely influential. And it was used both by spiritualists and by people that were not spiritualists, but both believed that the phenomena were real. So we start, as we see on the left here, with a directing principle that for spiritualists is basically discarnate spirits, but for others is the medium's unconscious, or sometimes the mentality of the group, that basically manipulate or guide the production of phenomena. This acts on this middle point here, an acting principle, which is a force that comes out of the body of mediums mainly, but also of seers, and produces, that's the part in the diagram that says effect, produces telekinesis, materialization, light, etc. This is the model in a very general way that was prevalent in early and late spiritualism and psychical research. As you can see in the left, there are some of my articles on this. This is a topic I'm really interested, and I have done some historical examinations of some of the historical ideas on these things. This is an example of the Russian chemist Baudelaire, and he's writing in 1874. And he says the source of this force proceeds from the ponderable material of the medium. The creation of a force need not be postulated without a corresponding consumption of energy. What happens is but the transference of some living energy emanating from a material body to another body. Again, he's articulating what a lot of people believe, spiritualists and non-spiritualists, to explain materializations, telekinesis, light, and the like. And it was not the creation of new energy. A lot of them were very aware of the ideas from physics of conservation of energy. So what they were talking was a modification of energy. The vital force of the medium was exteriorized and modified in a way that will allow it to act outside the body. The assumption was that normally that force was part of the metabolic functions of the medium. No one knows the details of those things, even to this day. So also today, if we could bring a reliable medium into the laboratory, and much more could be done, studying medical, psychophysiological aspects of the medium, that perhaps will give us corroboration of these views or expansion or changing them in some way. Many postulated these ideas of force. You see Oliver Lodge in 94 that is talking about temporary prolongations from the medium's body, as if a portion of vital or directing energy has been detached. And the same with Flammarion in France, and Enrico Morselli, an Italian psychiatrist that studied Palladino, that also believe in what they call a biopsychic force. Again, a lot of these are just names, a force, a prolongation, biopsychic force, psychic force. We really don't know how this happens, how this thing, and even today, a lot of people are skeptical about the actual existence of these forces, which are generally also related to other phenomena such as auras and many other things. These are just more examples of the discussions of this force. I will not stop. I just want to say a little about the issue of fraud, because certainly there was a lot of fraud, and that cannot be denied. Some of the exposures like these ones were controversial within and outside spiritualism, in which the spirit here that was materialized with the medium Florence Cook was grabbed, as was done with many other mediums, and they found that it was the medium in disguise. That was a very common occurrence. If you go through a lot of the spiritualist journals, go for example to the Religio-Philosophical Journal, an American journal, it's full of this type of exposures. People used to talk about spirit grabbing as an example. The Palladino substitution trick that I mentioned before, here you have an actual description of someone that saw her liberate one of her arms from control and touch someone's arm that was sitting close to the medium. So again, she was simulating a paranormal effect. This is a particularly interesting and funny case published in 1906. The British medium Charles Eldon. He used to travel from seance to seance with a chair. Why? Because the chair had magnetic power, and he had a lot of excuses like that. And basically some spiritualists became suspicious, and in the absence of the medium, they went in and they discovered some secret compartment in the chair, and inside the compartment they found all of these masks and things to simulate materialization phenomena. The medium was confronted and he admitted it, and it's an interesting case. So I guess the lesson is, do not let mediums carry chairs from seance to seance. But not only that, that's the importance of control. That's why you have to check mediums, and you have to see if they have accomplices. You have to be very critical in these things, because there are a lot of people in the history of this phenomena that basically have been swindlers. And that's a problem. Stanislawa Popielska, a medium from Poland. This was in darkness, and they took this infrared photograph, and they caught her trying to grab normally an object from a table. I suppose she was going to throw the object or do something with it. Again, these are just a few examples here. I'm not saying that all mediums are like this, or they commit all these tricks. But we need to be aware that control is very important, and clear descriptions of the conditions in order to evaluate these cases. These are a few other examples published in the Washington Post and in other places. You will have access to this slide, so I don't go into great detail. And I believe this is my last slide, so I will not torture you too much longer, which is, it's very important, historically speaking, to assess the impact of physical mediumship on psychical research. First, of course, the obvious impact is evidence for physical phenomena. And this phenomena real, that provides a subject matter for psychical research. You see, all these physical mediums contributed in that way, but they also help us develop a variety of theoretical concepts, mainly based on the psychic force model. And that also came a little into the modern idea of psychokinesis, except that the modern idea of psychokinesis that was developed more by J.B. Rhine and his associates, mainly from the 1930s on. Also, the research was starting to get published in the 1940s. The idea of psychokinesis that comes out from the Duke University Parapsychology Laboratory is not that of a psychic force like all these other mediums, but it's more like a non-physical process, like a psychic process that is not an idea of energy transfer. Again, that's beyond my presentation, but just wanted to point you out that even though there is some influence, today the idea of psychokinesis is not the same idea as I have discussed here from the mediumship records of the past. Then, of course, there is the issue of development of research techniques. From the time of Crookes, and even before him, in the United States, there was a chemist called Robert Hare. They were using instruments, and that created a tradition of instrumental research that was very influential in making these studies more systematic. That doesn't mean that the issue of fraud and inaccuracies was left out, but in some cases it was very impressive and it allowed the researchers to do all kinds of new, different things. And finally, I just would like to mention the whole idea of the creation of images about mediumship. A lot of the mediums, like you see in the left, the problems that Palladino had when she came to New York between 1909 and 1910 gave a really bad image to mediumship. A lot of the exposures of the mediums I have mentioned also did that. Unfortunately, that, taints the image of a lot of these mediums, even if many of them there was no evidence of real fraud with them, or maybe it was a case of mixed mediumship. It's hard to say, but all of these things, from the way the medium performed to how it was investigated and the like, has provided clear influences in how psychical research has developed to our day. And I'm afraid with that I'm out of time. I should be stopping now. The next slides that I have are just bibliographical ones. This one is about some primary sources of research of Crawford, Crookes, Shelley, and many others. There are secondary sources, books that have been book and articles from more recent times discussing some of these old cases. You can check this at your leisure later. And I hope that I have been able to present a very general view of the phenomena, some of the personalities, some of the issues, including the problematic issue of fraud, and also the ideas of psychic force that were very important in the development of physical mediumship. And still, the few physical mediums that are around today, I think that you can see a lot of these problems or a lot of these issues surrounding performances. But I should stop now because I have said that I have been, I think, a little too long. And if there are any questions, now is the time. Thanks for your attention.
Carlos, Andrea is asking about levitating tables. Were they always made of wood?
Yeah, in all these cases that I have reviewed, they were all made of wood. I will assume that in more recent times there have been other materials used, metal or even plastic. I know, a lot of people now in the 20th century have used plastic tables and with phenomena that are not as dramatic as those of the old days, but limiting it to the old days, all the chairs, all the tables were made of wood. A lot of them will say that it didn't have to be wood, Many objects could be affected. There were porcelain objects, metal objects, like small candelabra or vases or things that were moved around in seances. So it didn't have to be wood. It was just, in the old days that I have covered here, wood was even more widely used than it is today.
Simon is asking if equipment that's used in modern experiments, like in poltergeist investigations, if they can make use of force or proximity sensors as measures of data, or as an additional measurement, could you use a random number generator? And has something like that ever been used in mediumship experiments?
I don't know if anyone using random number generators or there are some instruments being used right now. Right now there are some studies being done in Argentina with missing table phenomena. It's not with a medium, but it's with a person that seems to be gifted in producing these phenomena. And my understanding is that they are starting to use, and that they will use more in the future, all these measures of pressure and the like. I don't know how far they're planning to go, but in general, one problem with this is that now in recent times, there are not so many mediums, physical mediums, as they used to be before. I mean, it's not that they have disappeared. They are still around. But in the investigation, sometimes it's very difficult. Sometimes the mediums do not want to be investigated, or I don't know, there are all kinds of practical issues. That will be a good question to ask to Steve Browdy, which is the last presentation tomorrow, because he will be dealing with a group that has had a lot of those problems, including accusations of fraud and all kinds of issues. It will be good to ask him that, what instruments and what things he has used, and why are these things not more frequently done. Another thing is also a lot of people that are in parapsychology, they don't want to be involved with these things. This is far out stuff. This is very controversial, and a lot of people, frankly, I don't think they do not want to be associated with this type of phenomena, particularly materializations, things floating in the air that you can touch and photograph. That's another problem. So, these are the social aspects of psychic research, but I think are important there are very few people like Steve Browdy that are willing to travel around like he has been doing to look for some of these persons and try to document this phenomenon.
Jesse is asking if anybody has suggested to mediums or asked mediums if there's any evidence of childhood abuse or trauma, and this is following on the notion that this is often related to other psychic experiences or to the propensity to experience psychic phenomena.
Yeah, I think some people have looked into that, but I don't know. I'm focusing here on physical mediums. I don't know in the case of physical mediums. I think the few persons that have done the Elizabeth Roxford in England, for example, they have been focusing on mental mediums. Sylvia Hart Wright here in the United States has also done something with that, but I'm not sure if she has been dealing with mediums. I think she has been dealing more with regular people that have had after-death experiences and the like. So there have been some investigation, but I don't know in terms of physical mediumship. Certainly, you can investigate the early life of some of these mediums. Sapia Palladino is said, and there's some records supporting that she had a very traumatic early life and the like. But I cannot generalize here to other physical mediums. I really don't know.
Okay, thank you. That's about all the time we have, and
very informative talk. I'm always amazed because I always learn something new every time he goes to this topic. I'd like to thank everybody who made comments and asked questions. Thank you, Carlos. I don't know if you noticed, if you scroll up in the chat, you'll see lots of clapping hands. But it was a wonderful talk, and I hope to see you in 15 minutes at the Business Law Case by Dr. Rosemary Pilkington. So we'll see you in a little bit.
Hi there, I'm Lizette Coley. I'm president of Parapsychology Foundation. So welcome to our YouTube channel. We have lots to look at, so please check out our videos. Don't forget to subscribe. Thank you.